crazy for feeling so blue.
The first thing I have to say, we are very, very lucky that this review is happening. I've been meaning to do this review a week and a half, and I simply haven't been able to find the time. Or it's meaning you gotta put on makeup and look presentable, and sometimes I just don't want to do that. So many excuses, but we're here. The second thing I need to say is, apparently I look like Justin Bieber. Agree or disagree? I think particularly on hair days like this where my hair doesn't curl so much, I look like the Biebs. Agree or disagree? Today's book is The Key by Kathryn Hughes. And if you saw my review of The Girl in the Letter, you'll know that I had been reading this one right when I finished that one. And I had liked it a whole lot more, and I'd been hoping it would continue that way. On the whole, yes, I was exceedingly surprised and pleased at how much I enjoyed it. I was disappointed by the end, and it could be because I didn't realize who this book was going to be about, like who the main character was. By the time we got to that point, she wasn't my favorite character, and I didn't understand her. Okay, so I was just reminding myself, because this is another one of those books where I forgot what it was about. I kind of thought it might have been a ghost story, and this is probably the third book in almost a straight succession that I thought was going to be supernatural, and it wasn't. But the book, just to remind myself that I wasn't entirely crazy about what it was about, is about this young woman who, her name is Ellen, and she decides to become a nurse at a mental institution. It's the mid-50s. It takes a look at all the things that are going on in this institution called Ambergate. And there is well, you can't see that, can you? But there is quite a cast of characters, which is similar to The Girl in the Letter. Unlike The Girl in the Letter, I did find these characters a little harder to keep track of. They were sort of interchangeable, particularly the women in the ward, because there's a girl named Amy, there's Pearl, Queenie, and Belinda. It took a minute to understand who was who. Amy is the main character. It starts with, in modern day, with this woman named Sarah investigating Ambergate. She wants to write a story on it. While she's there and looking through things, she discovers this cache of suitcases. So basically the suitcases of the patients. We get a glimpse into some of the contents of these suitcases. She comes home, and her father had at some form or another been part of Ambergate. We don't know if he was a patient, if he was a doctor, if he was an orderly. All we know is that he was involved, and he doesn't want to talk about it at all. And he discourages her from delving into this. We transition into the 1950s, in which Ellen is embarking upon her first day at Ambergate. Not long after that, Amy shows up. So we have those three perspectives. Eventually, Dr. Lambourne, who is the psychiatrist, apparently we had gotten an early perspective from him, but listening to this, I definitely tuned out because I didn't realize that we'd had, or I forgot. So we do have an early on perspective of his. I think we must have something in the, like, kind of the middle. And then we get quite a few towards the end. These are kind of the main characters. I guess because I was coming off of the dregs of The Girl in the Letter, I was expecting it to go back and forth between perspectives, and it's almost more of like a couch where Sarah finds the things from the asylum, we jump into the asylum, and then we get to a certain point and we come back to Sarah and we learn some truths. From that point on, we stay in the present day and we explore what happened to Amy in particular. But to get into it, I preferred Ellen. I thought she was much more interesting, but it became very clear that Amy was the main character. And when she became more prevalent, I found myself wondering why we even had anything from Ellen, because she got dropped. She shows up, she is not prepared for what she finds. We have another sadistic nun, Sister Atkins, which we're stereotypical here. Not nearly as bad because we do have Ellen to balance her out. Although, I don't know, I couldn't understand why Ellen was so sympathetic towards these patients, which makes me sound like a terrible person. But I could not understand her motivation for continuing to try in a situation where it's very obvious that that sort of treatment, while it's not necessary or not effective, I kept waiting. It felt like she was juvenile and she wasn't learning from her mistakes, and she wasn't figuring out how to best handle the patients. I just kept waiting for her to lay down the law, but she continued to coddle these patients. One in particular, Gertie, again, it was one of those plot lines that I didn't quite understand the need for, because we meet her very early on. She's been in this institution 40 odd years, and this intrigues Ellen because not only has Gertie been there for a long time, but she hasn't spoken in 16. Nobody really knows how long she's been there. Nobody knows or really remembers when she stopped talking. Nobody knows much about her at all. And this intrigues Ellen. She has met another nurse named Dougie. So my thought here, okay, segue, tangent, not segue, tangent. Sarah, when she's investigating this crumbling down insane asylum, encounters a young man named Nathan. Nathan refuses to talk about his family, refuses to go home, refuses to get help of any sort. And I'm thinking, is he a ghost? Because I'm thinking this is a ghost story. So then when we meet Dougie, I'm like, wait a minute, maybe Dougie is Nathan. No, he's not. A spoiler here. Nathan's name is actually Adam, and he's a runaway. His mother had been a teenage mother. He hadn't even known she was his mother. He thought she was his sister for the longest time. And now he doesn't like the expectations that she's placed on him. Whether or not they're skewed due to his viewpoint is not really the point. It's more that he doesn't like her expectations for him. He doesn't want to be focusing on school, academics, the future. He'd rather be playing and hanging out with his friends and acting like a normal teenage boy. One day he decides he's just not gonna go home. Ellen, she knows none of this until towards the end of the book. She's reading a newspaper article and she sees an article of his mother basically being like, my son's been gone for 8 months. I really miss him and I hope he comes home. She puts things together. So he wasn't a ghost. He was just a runaway who never got any vitamin D. Ellen has met Gertie. Gertie's pretty nasty, despite the fact that she is a mute and she has been here for a long time. She's a mean piece of work, which I was like, okay, so this is going somewhere. We are going to delve into Gertie. Not long after, Nurse Atkins says, oh yeah, well, Gertie's sick and she's probably not going to make it. So Ellen, Gertie is really rude to her. She's so mean to her. But Ellen is like, oh, I'm going to go visit her. And it's just, I don't want to sound like a terrible person, but I could not understand why Ellen kept doing this to herself. So she goes, nothing really works. She goes back and she's talking to Dougie. And he's like, I know somebody who can help you get information. He brings her to like a caretaker who had at one point been in the asylum. And then this guy has access to files. And from this file and from this caretaker, they put together the fact that Gertie had been discovered wandering the streets. She had been married, but like nobody ever came to claim her. And it's because she had met an American, whirlwind romance, is going back to America with him, only for it to be on the Titanic. What happened to the Titanic? It sank and her husband died. When she made it back to London, I guess it's the trauma of it all. And they never explain why she stopped speaking. They never explain really anything else about her, except then Ellen, because Dougie is American. She asks him to come speak to Gertie basically on her deathbed because she feels like hearing his accent will comfort Gertie, remind her of her husband, and maybe that's all she needs in order to let go and move on. He's like, I'm not going to pretend to be a dead guy, which this whole thing, I don't know, I guess it was sort of setting Dougie up in characterization, but I don't know. Like 10 chapters in, Gertie dies. And I was like, why did we place so much emphasis on her? Except we're trying to establish Ellen's empathy? I don't know. I thought it was kind of a dead end, and I wished it would have gone on further. I wished we'd gotten more resolution. Loved the backstory on Gertie, but I was like, what's going on here? Like, why am I receiving this information? What is this subplot for? Ellen and Dougie eventually get engaged, and we'll, put a stopper on that. Coming to Amy. Amy. First off, this was totally my bad. For some reason, I thought she was like 8. She's a grown woman. She's like 20. But we see her packing up and leaving her house, and there's a woman there that she does not like, and she blames for her circumstances. The whole thing with Amy is that she and her mother during World War II had gone off to the country while her dad fought. So it had just been them, and they'd had this great time, this great lifestyle. War ends, the dad is coming home, and she's like, who is this dude? He and her mother had been madly in love. They had been high school sweethearts. And I guess it's like the ensuing 9 months later, her mother is pregnant. She's going to have this child. Amy runs into the road for sundry reasons. The mother chases after her and gets hit by the car that was going to hit Amy. This subsequently kills the mother and the unborn child. I do not know how many years later, but she and her father, and part of me was wondering if it was supposed to be like an incestuous implication. I don't think so, but sometimes I was like, huh. Anyways, so she and her father become emotionally and almost physically dependent on each other until he meets Carrie. I don't really know what to think about or believe about Carrie. From Amy's perspective, she's a witch of a woman, both in personality and looks. When we actually do see her, we realize she's quite beautiful, and she's far younger than Amy had portrayed her to be. But he meets Helen, they end up getting pregnant and having a baby girl. Amy's issue with this is she doesn't like that Carrie makes her dad happy, which is when I'm just like, what are we getting at here? It's really just being more of a threatened situation where, yeah, like they clung to each other during this period after her mother's death, of which she blames herself. When they have their daughter, this angers Amy because she feels like shunted aside. Like her father would rather have this new family. And so on her mother's birthday, she gets very angry because her father doesn't acknowledge it at all and would rather cuddle and canoodle with Carrie. So she says Carrie in particular is gonna know what it feels like to lose somebody or something. So she takes the baby and she's going to drown both of them in a lake. Somehow she gets discovered before she can. This is what leads her to Ambergate. But she's extremely bitter, extremely angry, and extremely standoffish. She's also extremely intelligent. Not conniving, but manipulative, in my opinion. She's resistant to sessions with Dr. Lambourne. And then all of a sudden, she has this idea of, because her dad visits once, gives a letter to Dr. Lambourne, and apparently what the letter said is, I want her to stay here. She realizes there's a way to get out. And in my head, due to her behavior, due to her desire to get out, due to her manipulative tendencies, I'm thinking she is going to trick Dr. Lambourne. She is going to make him think that she's in love with him. Or actually, okay, so I'm a little ahead of myself. There's another guy named Ed. And, this whole time I'm trying to figure out the connection of Sarah's father. So I'm actually thinking that Sarah's father is Ed. And Ed is at Ambergate because he had been, I think, in a bicycle accident. And from this, he began having seizures. So I thought, okay, this could be a reason that you would be in a mental institution but not have a mental issue. So I'm thinking that she's actually in love with Ed, that Amy is in love with Ed, but then she's going to manipulate Dr. Lambourne into getting her out of there. But in actuality, she is in love with Dr. Lambourne. And it could be that I simply don't see enough of them together, because one of her major complaints when her dad shows up is that she never actually sees the doctor. Like, she's only seen him once. He apparently does give her more attention than any of the other patients because he sees her as savable, salvageable. Like, all the other people in the asylum are too far gone. Like, there's nothing he can do for them. So he's going to invest in her to try to heal her so that she can get out. So I guess they have all of these sessions that we know nothing about. And she is falling in love with him, which apparently he's a real attractive dude. He's 10, 20 years her senior. But I guess through these sessions, she's falling in love with him. He takes her outside of Ambergate, I believe. I don't really know where they are, but I do think it's outside the walls. And it's just one of those outings, one of those excursions to kind of give her a breath of fresh air, to expose her to something else, to help her mental state by being amongst real people in a real environment. She gets him to kiss her, to kind of admit that he has feelings for her. One thing leads to another. They end up doing things, and then she ends up getting pregnant. At this point that she does sort of go crazy because he feels so guilty about what he's done, about basically taking advantage of a patient, abusing that doctor-patient relationship, that he leaves. He doesn't tell her. She finds out through other people, and it's like she can't cope with it. And then when she finds out she's pregnant, one of her roommates is Belinda. And she and Belinda don't have a very good relationship. She had befriended Ed, and Belinda is very promiscuous. One time she tries to seduce Ed, and Amy does not like this, which this is around the time that I realized she was not 8. She must have been a much bigger person because she clocks Belinda a good one. And this just kind of starts a little something. Maybe there'd been something brewing there before. I don't know. As I said, I thought it was really hard to keep track of all the characters. And they have a squabble over a chair, which I thought this was a bit extreme. So they have their fight in the courtyard about Ed. They're both threatened and kind of get in trouble. And it's like, oh, you need to kiss and make up, to which they pretend to kiss and make up. Then they get into another scuffle over this chair, are sat down again, and all of a sudden, it's like, oh, I'm sorry I did that. Nobody was intervening. Like, they were just, there. I don't know, maybe they were waiting their punishment. I can't remember. I think it was Belinda was just like, oh, I'm sorry. It happened a little too quickly for me. But then they start to bond. Amy continues to say, were I anywhere else, I would never be friends with this girl, but, you know, time and a place, right? And what we learn about Belinda is she is promiscuous. She's promiscuous because she had been molested by her dad throughout her adolescence. He likes young girls. So he had found a girlfriend, and he liked this girlfriend for one reason, and it's because this girlfriend had a young daughter. Belinda got so upset, I think she threw a rock through a window, and then he institutionalized her. I thought she was actually really interesting once you got to know her. I thought she had a lot of potential, and I wished we'd gotten more of her, because she does not see what her dad did as wrong. For me personally, I could have used a little bit more context as to the time and how people viewed this. Was this something that was acceptable or not acceptable? Was this something that people acknowledged or didn't acknowledge? I really was intrigued by her state of mind, because she refused to accept that her father had done anything wrong. She was convinced that he loved her. And I thought that we could have done so much with that. But then we also had, I think it's Pearl and Queenie, I can't keep straight. One of them, so I thought these side characters were quite interesting. But one of these was a very overweight young woman who got tricked into losing something that you can't get back to somebody, because she had always been heavy, but after this incident, like, the guy completely out of her league, but he proposes to her and he gets her to do things with him. He leaves her at the altar. He never shows up, and it turns out he had been dared. He was a GI, and he had been dared by his comrades to get her to do things with him. And this sends her into a tailspin in which she gains a ton of weight. She will not take her wedding dress off. Then she's institutionalized. So I thought the cast of characters, despite the fact that I couldn't keep them straight, were very colorful and very interesting and helped to round out Ambergate. But back to Amy. She has decided that she wants to leave Ambergate. Her father has died. He has a heart attack. And now Carrie is in charge of her. I thought we could have had more of this. I didn't quite understand, is Carrie a good guy or a bad guy? Like, is she just afraid of Amy because Amy had this violent tendency? Or is she mad at Amy because Amy tried to kill her child? Like, I didn't really understand what was going on with Carrie. In any case, Carrie's like, I cannot let her leave this place. Ed has healed enough that he can go home. And this was something confusing to me. He wants Amy to leave with him because he's fallen in love with her. And for me, I'm like, well, she loves him too. Except I think by this point, we knew that she was in love with Dr. Lambourne. I guess she was like, no, like, basically I can't do it the honest way. I have to sneak out. So they make plans for her to sneak out, only for Belinda to be sharp enough to realize that something's going on. She informs the sister, who then stops Amy. Amy is so mad at Belinda that when Belinda is taunting her about something, she had this shard of pottery of china and she sticks it in Belinda's artery. Belinda doesn't die, which I was like, do I like it? Do I not like it? I don't know. But this puts Amy in a padded cell. So now she's waking up. It's like a week later. She's been drugged this entire time. Ellen has come to visit her. She is trying to eat the breakfast that has been brought, but she vomits everywhere, at which point she realizes that she's pregnant. She reveals this to Ellen, who takes this information to the sister, and nobody will believe Amy because, I guess because she's a mental patient. Again, I mean, Ellen believes her, but it's just another one of those stereotypes. I'm like, Amy is going crazy, but I didn't quite understand her de-evolution. She has the baby, but the umbilical cord had been tied around its neck, so it's basically a stillbirth. Ellen is tasked with taking the baby away, and Amy is convinced that Dr. Lambourne is coming back for her and they're going to have this life together. So we're seeing, and I don't know where it comes from because I don't feel like we were given enough backstory, enough development to really understand what flipped that switch in her, except for that he did essentially abandon her after they did the you-know-what, but she was so sane. It didn't make sense to me that a guy walking away from her, this is before she knew she was pregnant, that a guy walking away from her would cause her to snap. And again, because I don't understand how she fell in love with him, I can't gauge her reaction by the depth of her feelings for him, because I thought she was using him to get out. So Ellen is taking the baby to the morgue or the crematorium or somewhere, only for the baby to come to. She makes a U-turn to return it to Amy and the delivery nurse, only to find the room empty because I guess Amy hemorrhaged. She was like bleeding out, so they took her to the hospital. She goes to the hospital to learn that some gentleman had been visiting Amy and claimed to be her fiance. And Amy is saying it's Dr. Lambourne. Turns out that it's Ed. And Ed, I guess, holds on to Amy for, I mean, we learn this later in the novel. He holds on to the idea of Amy for a long time, only for her to eventually be like, leave it. It's not going to happen. And that still, I would have liked to have seen more of Amy and Ed, because this huge thing is built up about them, only for when he leaves Ambergate to really never see or hear from him again. I was like, I don't know. I just had some issues with that. But Amy is under the impression that the baby has died because the delivery nurse is like, look, this kid is not going to be right. He went without oxygen for far too long, and there's no point in telling her that her child survived. We essentially leave it there, and Amy is descending further into madness with the loss of her child and how this child was supposed to be what brought her and Dr. Lambourne together and all this stuff. So now we are back in the present day with Sarah, who is having her own personal drama concerning her husband, who they were having fertility issues, and in their pursuit of getting pregnant, she became too fanatical and it drove a wedge between them. He left her, went and got some other girl pregnant, and now that's what they're facing. I thought it was pointless. Because we had so little of Sarah. At first, in the beginning of the novel, I thought it was very intriguing until I realized we're not going to have enough of Sarah for this to matter. We catch glimpses of this guy, and he does come back, and he's like, I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I want to be with you. And this is what I liked about Sarah. She's like, we're over. Stop it. Like, you caused this, and now you have an obligation to somebody else. We learn that Sarah's father, his connection to Ambergate is, what do you think the connection is? He's Dr. Lambourne, which, now that I say that, reminds me, nobody would believe Amy that Dr. Lambourne was the father of her child because he'd had mumps as a child and therefore he was thought to be sterile. Obviously, he's not sterile because he went on to father at least 2 children. And when the book opens, I guess his wife had recently passed and he had been visiting her grave every day. I thought this wife was going to play in somehow or another, and she doesn't. We see the fact that he is obsessed with keeping her memory alive, only for her to be a non-entity once we pick back up in the present day. And he essentially is in love with Amy, and I guess he'd always been in love with Amy, and if he'd known she was pregnant, he never would have left her. And I was like, hold on a minute. What? Now what they're gonna do is they gotta go find Amy. And what Sarah had found in Amy's suitcase had been a note. This note led her to Ellen, who had married Dougie and they'd lived happily ever after. This note was intended because I guess when patients leave the asylum, they're given their belongings, their suitcase back. And this was intended for her to open it up, find the note, and then go find Ellen. So the fact that the suitcase was still there meant that Amy never left. She did leave, but she refused to take the suitcase with her because it was from another time and place. It was from another lifetime, and that wasn't who she was anymore. Sarah and her father find Amy. They reveal that the baby did not die, and they are trying to find the baby. Here's where we realize that Amy had been in the asylum 20 odd years, and she'd gone crazy while she was in the asylum. She takes medication. I don't know what's wrong with her, but she sometimes can't distinguish the difference between reality and the past. And so she talks about this baby like he's there, like they're a family and they've got to prepare for him. And Dr. Lambourne's like, this man probably has kids of his own. So now we are done being in the past and we are in the present, and we are seeing this journey of finding the baby, whose name turns out to be Joseph. He does have mental handicap, and maybe also he's in a wheelchair, so maybe mentally and physically handicapped, or maybe physically handicapped because he's mentally handicapped. It's not explained. Throughout this process, Dr. Lambourne realizes he's always been in love with Amy, wants to be with Amy, and we get her being like, what are you doing? Like, what's going on here? Why are you treating me this way? It's kind of weird, kind of awkward. And this is the point where I was disappointed that Amy was our main character, because it went from this story about life at an asylum to laser focus on one character and where her life went. But the book, we are introduced to Sarah first, and then we're introduced to Ellen. So my thought is that these two women, or at least Ellen, like, okay, Sarah is the door to the real story. So Ellen is the one that we're going to be focusing on as she navigates this insane asylum and all of its patients. No, it's all about Amy. So now we go down this rabbit hole of finding the son and navigating our feelings for each other. Eventually do track down Joseph. I quite like this because back in that day, babies born to unwed mothers, or I guess even insane asylum patients, would be left with their mothers for 6 weeks, and then they would be adopted off. The woman who ends up adopting Joseph can't bring herself to do that, to essentially rip a child away from its mother. So I don't remember what exactly happens or what gets her to where she is, but she ends up in the nursery where Joseph is. She's inquiring about him. She's told this kid is never gonna be right in the head. Like, you don't want him. He's more trouble than he's worth. She doesn't accept that. So she adopts him, and I really enjoyed that message right there, where a baby is a baby. They are a person, they are a child, and they are deserving of love. And I loved that these people who could have chosen any child, decided to go with the one who may never be able to love them back. I thought it was a fantastic message, a fantastic little route. And Amy, she's sitting here watching them interact, watching this mother Joseph, and being like, oh, well, why does she do it that way? That's not how she should do it. But also realizing she could never have mothered him in his condition. Like, that was just something beyond her capabilities. There's another character. Sarah's at the library for some reason. This gentleman comes with his kid and mistakes her for the storytime lady, asks her if she will watch his daughter because story time is, I don't know, half an hour away, but he's got this other thing to do, and he blah, blah, blah. And she forms something of a relationship with him, but it's really more about the daughter. It's like, oh, the daughter wants you to come have dinner with us. The daughter wants this. The daughter wants that. She kind of moves in with them, but she's not dating him. It's for the daughter. It's really weird. Maybe that's what they do in England. That's not what I would be doing. I'm like, I like you. I'm not moving in with you if we're not actually together. You've never declared anything. Sarah is finding this healing journey, and she finally lays down the law with this dude, and she's like, do you like me or do you not like me? Part of my brain was thinking that this actually could be Amy and Dr. Lambourne's son. I was like, that would be kind of gross. But at the same time, if I'd done the math, this guy could never have been their son, because Amy, she's like 30-something. You know what? Actually, I don't think they're that far apart in age, because I think Joseph is 45 and Amy 35, 36, 37. So this guy could have been her brother, and it wouldn't have seemed that out of place. Anyways, and he finally is like, he like kisses her, and he's like, what does that tell you? Which, she really did not need these romantic subplots, or maybe she should have only had one, or maybe her subplot was really learning who Adam was, learning who Nathan was, and reconnecting him with his family based off of what she's learning about her own family and about, I was going to say Ivy, but Ivy's from The Girl in the Letter. Oh, it's time to go to bed. This book was vastly better than The Girl in the Letter. I thought it was written better. Sometimes it felt like there was head hopping, but it was more that the paragraphing, you couldn't see that when you're listening. So sometimes it was hard keeping up with everything that was going on, because I was like, how did we get from here to there? And there were definitely moments where I didn't understand why that was part of the book, how it connected the bigger picture. Basically, Dr. Lambourne and I think Amy kind of live happily ever after. He declares his intentions to her or for her. That whole relationship doesn't sit right with me. I just don't get it. Like, he is wholly devoted to his dead wife, only for Amy to come back into picture, and he's like, oh my gosh, she's so pretty, and I think I love her. I would recommend this book. I would love to know what you think about it. Have you read anything else by her? Does anybody have any good ghost stories? I could really use a good haunting, you know, that takes place in an insane asylum, like without stereotypical nuns. Maybe I'll just write it. But that is the key. Don't really know what the key is, but that's the key. Bye.